Hammer Nutrition's second part on demystifying fat, part 2, just hit. And I have to say, I'm really impressed with Dr. French's articles. In part 2, he not only does a great job of describing the various fats, but also each one's role in the diet. Just as importantly, he debunks the commonly held notion that saturated fats are bad. I encourage everyone and anyone who wants to have a deeper understanding of fats to read both of these articles, precisely because this isn't coming from yours truly, but from a conventional sports nutrition company. Like the previous vlog related to demystifying fat, part 1, I'm going to flesh out aspects of this article because context matters. More importantly, this is critically important to you to understand and get right so you can achieve higher health and peak performance. Dr. French did not mince words and came out of the chute debunking the most demonized fat of all, saturated fat. Yeah, the devil. Yes, saturated fat is not the evil artery clogging demon it has been made out to be. So why is it clogging arteries then? Well, here's where I can add context to literally bridge that knowledge gap between what we've been led to believe for decades and the emerging truth about saturated fat as described in this article by Dr. French. Now, saturated fats, they're actually the most stable and energy dense of the 3 fats. This means they are much less prone to oxidize, thus go bad, and produce free radicals. But what this means in reality is that they are given metabolic priority for storage, and they're the last to be used for energy when there are excess calories. Thus, in the context of a conventional high-carb diet, glucose from carbs, polyunsaturated and monounsaturated fats all cut to the front of the metabolic line ahead of saturated fats. Now stick with me here because this is where glucose throws a knockout sucker punch. The kind that leads to heart disease and death. But with cholesterol and saturated fats getting the blame for all these decades for the clogging of arteries that lead to heart attacks and death. Glucose in particular has to either be metabolized by the cells for energy, converted to fat by the liver, or glycated to a molecule to take it out of circulation. And that molecule is often cholesterol. Free glucose can't accumulate in the bloodstream or you will die. It's just that simple. If you want to know, just ask any type 1 diabetic. And it's important to know this about glucose because it relates to fat. And this is why glucose has to cut to the front of the metabolic line. And here, in an oversimplified description, is what happens. Okay, there's a lot of other variables, but this is an oversimplified version. Okay, regular consumption of meals where there are 2 crucial factors in play is the scenario. There's too many concentrated carbohydrates and there's too many calories. Yes, calories in, calories out do matter, but they're not the only factor and not in the simplistic way it's thought. Now, when this occurs, glucose is disposed of in 3 ways. First, it's given priority for energy production in the body cells. Second, it's converted to fat for storage. And third, it's glycated. And here's a hint. Glycation is one of the key heart disease triggers. Now, consuming a lot of carbohydrates on a chronic basis sets in motion a metabolic cascading effect. And depending on the variables like activity level, hormonal balance, metabolic capacity, stress, and genetic predispositions, there are a host of outcomes from this quote-unquote cascade. What is more, this is highly dynamic, and that can be both good and bad. So under this scenario of too many carbohydrates and energy on a chronic basis, too much sugar is being burned, too many saturated fats are being created and not being burned. Thus, they're accumulating somewhere in the body. Now, here's where you really need to pay attention. All right? Stick with me here. Now, meanwhile, while glucose is being burned and fat is being stored, glycation is occurring in the bloodstream. Fact of the matter is, glycation is always occurring, but it is the amount of glycation and the type of molecules glucose attaches to that are important. And when you have a high carbohydrate meal on a chronic basis, especially when it's combined with polyunsaturated oils or even somewhat oxidized monounsaturated oils, this makes for a cascade of glycation leading to oxidation, leading to free radical forming, and this leads to a lot of endothelial inflammation and damage, particularly where there is a lot of blood flow, like the heart. This is where cholesterol and saturated fat get sucker punched. By coming to the rescue to protect and repair the endothelial damage and build up that protective layer that clogs arteries. But then that layer gets damaged or glycated, and then there's inflammation requiring another protective layer, and on and on and on until the artery is occluded by saturated fat and cholesterol. Got it? It is akin to accusing the firemen and fire trucks clogging a residential street where a house has been set on fire, accusing them of the crime, when the reality is the fire was set by an arsonist, in this case a toxic level of glucose, who has long since fled the scene and disappeared. Hopefully, this oversimplified analogy provides the necessary insight you need to truly understand why saturated fats are not the problem they have been made out to be. Our mitochondria actually prefer to metabolize and burn saturated fats via a process called beta oxidation because, one, they provide the most energy due to their saturation of hydrogen atoms. Second, because saturated fats are so stable, they are the cleanest and most efficient to metabolize for energy. And three, once the body is ramped up hormonally and enzymatically to burn fat, saturated fats provide a stable, bonk-free source of energy for hours or even days. It's what that little thing called evolution shaped us for. Now I know what you're thinking. Whoa, that was a lot to take in. Debunking saturated fats is a figurative fat bomb to mentally digest. But hopefully, I filled in the gaps and provided context on saturated fat to support and augment Dr. French's blog post. I'm going to leave the monounsaturated and polyunsaturated fats for a part 3, as there is some important nuance and minor correction that I can provide that will leverage the information that's given in this 2-part series by Dr. French for your benefit. In the meantime, no matter where you are in your fat-adapted journey, there's no better time than now to shift your physiology and metabolism back to the one nature meant us to have. That is, burning fat, optimizing that fat burn. We're here to help with the products and most importantly, the experience to help guide you to higher health and peak performance.